And what I found just unnerved me that farmers were actually plowing their harvest back into the ground because they couldn't get the food to the people.
Thank you for joining me today on the Land and Everything Else podcast. We have some dynamic and amazing guests today. I am so excited for today's conversation. One note as we get going, we are shooting from downtown Chicago, so there's going to be some horns, some sirens, Chicago sounds, and it's just going to be part of the world we are in today. So I want our listeners to know that ahead of time. So I'm so excited today. We have Hope Lovell and JaQ Campbell from ALPW, and I have known JaQ, my goodness gracious, since about 2019, 2018. One of the most dynamic people I've ever come to meet. I just met Hope, and this is going to be so much fun. And I was wondering if both of you could take a few minutes and introduce yourselves to our crew.
Excellent. Well, I'll kick us off real quick here. Thank you so much for having me, Craig. So excited to be part of this show today. Yes, we've had so much fun over the last 6+ years that we've known each other. And I'm so excited to hear that you are in my other favorite city, Chicago. I spend a lot of time there. So big shout out to the Windy City. I'm JaQ Campbell, founder and CEO of Alexander Legacy Private Wealth Management. We go by ALPW for short. We are about a 3.5-year-old investment firm that's part of the Carson Group, a $39 billion RIA based out of Omaha, Nebraska. And we are just thrilled to help not only our clients, but our advisors really take access of what I like to call right now the big RIA. And that doesn't stand for what you think it does. We're going to talk about that later in the show. So I'm going to hand it over to Hope. And so I'll keep that out there. All right. So Hope, I'll hand it over to you, my friend.
Hi there, Craig. It's such a pleasure. Hope Lovell, Chief Strategy Officer with ALPW. Also, I work with a nonprofit that's called Lovejoy Community Services, and we are a nonprofit developer developing an urban agri-community within Michigan. And so super excited to talk more about urban agriculture, the intersection of how even that looks from an investment standpoint as well.
It's as though I hit the lottery. Thank you. This is going to be so much fun and right in line with the mission of what we're trying to do. So a lot of our listeners, as we have this conversation today, we've got a lot of awesome insurance agents tuning in. We've got investment advisor representatives, some brokers, and a fair amount of people in the land business. So we've got some landowners and people in that land brokerage world too. So that's kind of the audience we've created. And I just want to share that. But let's start, JaQ. You threw out RIA. It's not what I think. Give me more.
Absolutely. Well, right now we're sitting in 2024 for those that are listening to us at the moment. And as we think about some of our high conviction areas, to be honest with you, Craig, I like to break it down in the acronym RIA. R standing for real estate, I standing for insurance, and A standing for alternatives, right? And so if we're building out a pie for our clients and we're really looking at, where things are today, and honestly, just if we're just thinking about, just what we should be thinking about as part of having an investment in our core portfolio, real estate, insurance, and now alternatives, those are just 3 areas that we're highly, highly convicted on. So I'll kind of throw that out there. I know we're going to dig into a little bit more around real estate and, of course, some alternative space. But I would say those are the areas that are really, really, really high priority for us as we continue down this journey, especially in the alt space.
Well, I love that. And Hope, from a strategy standpoint, I'd love to get some perspective too on this question. When we look at real estate in a portfolio, why don't you share your philosophy around that and a little bit about your process that you work through with clients or the firm when you're looking at a property that may or may not be a fit? Those are 2 separate questions, but I'd love to get the ball rolling on those.
Absolutely. So real estate, and I think that it's always it could be a part of the core portfolio. And, there's a place for equities, there's a public equities, but what we're definitely finding, even for some of our ultra high net worth investors and families is they absolutely want what's considered an alternative investment within that portfolio. And that can include real estate, of course, farmland, and there's so many different and fun ways of investing into the built environment and how even ultra high net worth individuals can play in that space, whether it's a direct investment, whether it is participating or co-investing, say, with someone else or being an equity investor. There's a lot of opportunities to diversify their portfolios here, as well as have a positive impact. And so we are big proponents of impact investing, and it allows people an opportunity to connect their values with what they're doing with their money.
I love that, and more firms should follow. I'll tell you that right off the bat. That's my first thought is like, yes. So do clients come to you with opportunities? Does the firm find opportunities and say, hey, you know, we thought 5% of this portfolio could be a fit. Here's an opportunity. I'm curious about how that occurs. It is organic, or am I missing it? Like how does that journey roll?
No, I think, for us, we are, Hope and I and the ALPW team, we're constantly keeping our ears to the ground as it relates to new and innovative ways to participate in the alternative market, especially in the real estate, land, and the private equity, private credit space. And so you'll probably see twice a month, 3 times a month, we're on someone's stage or we're at someone's workshop, really trying to make sure that for our clients, we're staying ahead of the game. We're understanding what the next 12, 24 months looks like. And then, of course, it's our job to then bring those ideas not only to our platform provider, which is the Carson Group, of course, and to let them know what we're hearing out there so we can be not only a platform that gets that to our clients, but also making sure that other advisors are aware of some of these unique strategies that are very, very, a compliment for such a time as this, right? And so to your point, we try to be very proactive at Alexander Legacy. We try to be like the first one in the room, the first one at the front of the room, if you will, if we're there, because again, our goal is to make sure that, as we see things changing with interest rates, as we see things changing in the real estate market, both on the commercial side and the residential side, there's a lot of moving parts. And so we want to stay ahead of the game. We were also fortunate to have a chief economist, Dr. Anthony Chan, on our team. So, having someone like that on speed dial definitely helps to make sure that we are very conscious about how we're serving our clients.
So one of my questions for you that I know a lot of listeners to this podcast have, and I do not know what your answer is going to be. How are you so good and effective at getting these opportunities on a platform quickly? I'm genuinely curious. Is there a magic with Carson? I mean, I generally am. We've seen in the farmland space some true struggles getting direct or pooled investments listed at custodians. That hasn't been an easy journey necessarily.
Correct.
I'm wondering from your end, it seems like it's going. What's the magic? Or is it just like, I'm curious.
I wouldn't say it's any real magic. I know Hope is very instrumental being our strategy officer. She can talk about her experience high level as far as, again, like you say, the ability to be able to present these opportunities, to have them go through the due diligence team, to actually get, the buy-in, right? Like you said, it's really a bit of a challenge because it is a new thing, right? It's it's still very new, and we're introducing something that is, is still not as, widely accepted as as investing in the, overall capital markets. And so it's going to take people like Hope and I, right, that are out here, in the field, meeting folks like yourself, other fund managers, going on trips, to Africa to see what's happening with the conscious investments happening over there, and then bringing these things back and having full conviction, around certain areas. So again, it is still difficult. Don't get me wrong, but you do need people that are out here advocating. Absolutely. Hope I'll let you chime in.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Craig, it goes into the passion and being able to articulate a value prop, right? I think it's for such a time as this when we can all see and participate and listen to the conversation that's happening even around climate change and how land is interacting and farmers are interacting and participating even in this conversation around carbon sequestration and how land can be very much a part of not just growing things and feeding people, right, but also cleaning the air. And so it's just continuing to have that conversation and going back to the custodians to talk about the value proposition of allowing people to put their money behind where their values and their interest is and attracting capital in a way that's going to meet the needs in the industry to be able to create the change that we all need to see.
And I know, JaQ, one thing about you that I have seen as a constant theme of your professional life is a true commitment to value and purpose and philosophy, and how you've built this firm, who you've attracted to the firm. I wonder if you could share a little bit. I love the idea of a values-based investment approach. I was wondering if you could both talk a little bit about that, deploying capital, working with clients, how clients choose, because it seems like values is this consistent passion of your work.
That's right. That's right. And no, I absolutely agree. That was the true DNA of why we decided to launch Alexander Legacy, is because, for us, we saw a major gap in industry. And that gap that we saw was, the lack of, more women, more people of color being able to not only have careers in this industry, but to really thrive as investors in this industry. Because again, many of this, you go back 50 years, we're just getting started in some cases. And so, being that I've been very fortunate to be in the industry 31 of those 50 years, right? I've seen a lot going through the 90s, the early 2000s. And now here we are in 2020, almost 5. And we just know, like, if we're going to make a difference in this world, if we're going to not only help to close the wealth gap that we know is critical, as we look at things like inflation, the fact that many young people are being etched out of even being a first-time home buyer, right? Hope and I bought our first home in our early 20s. To think nowadays, is that even possible for our young 20-year-olds to even be thinking about purchasing a $300,000 home in Chicago?
Right.
So those are the things, to your point, that I just sat back and I said, well, if anybody got to do something about it, it's got to be us, right? We need to really take this opportunity because with anything, right, any real businesses, they're trying to solve a problem. And so we saw a problem. It's about making sure people can eat and have access to clean water, access to energy, access to the things that us as Americans just take for granted. That feeds our heart for being able to do that work, not just here, but then also to be able to spread that once we're widely successful, to then take that and spread that across the world. So yes, we definitely believe in investing according to our values. We put our money where our mouth is. And we believe if we do it and we're leaders in that, hopefully, rising tide, right? We'll be able to kind of bring more people along with us on this journey. One of the things that you shared with me at the last conference you went to was about how values investing was just really the topic of the day. And it's something that has been on our spirits, for the last 20 plus years.
Absolutely. And I see it as what I call win-win-wins or triple wins, where it's not just the two parties involved win, but it's the community winning as well. And a lot of times that, people think that in order to do good, that it's only in that philanthropic space. But there's a lot of opportunities where you can invest money and make a return and benefit the community as well. So it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
That's right.
Well, Hope, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your passion and investment and the project that you're working on. What is the heart of agriculture and really the mission of the college that I work with? And I'd love for you to share that.
Absolutely. So, well, the project is right here in the backyard of Michigan State University, which is also has all about agriculture. And I got involved a couple of years ago, right in COVID, when went to the grocery store, saw there wasn't a lot of vegetables and was like, oh no, go. And so there was something that was happening with the supply chain that as a consumer, I just didn't understand. So that took me on my own sort of personal journey of wanting to understand what was going on. And what I found just unnerved me that farmers were actually plowing their harvest back into the ground because they couldn't get the food to the people.
The supply
And
chain.
so
Yeah.
in a time where we are touting, farm to table, but we recognize that many of us, unless we're going to a restaurant, we just don't really have that experience.
Sure.
And I wanted to find a way to, how can I create this farm to table experience? And so it was that precipice that pushed us into this project that people can essentially walk right out of their porch and have access to fresh food. And that using this no-till methodology that they can not only get fresh, wholesome food, but I found that, wow, when you treat the ground well, then it allows that the ground and the air to positively interact with each other. And so in an urban environment, in Michigan, I'm sure as in Illinois as well, there's a lot of smog and foggy days out there. And so we're all dealing with pollution. And for the first time, I think last year, we even had some days where we couldn't go outside without a mask on, right?
Sure.
And so how can now we participate in empowering the land to clean the air? And so again, it's those win-win-wins. And so now people can have fresh food. They can also be a part of cleaning the air. They can get access to housing. It was just all of those wins. And then, of course, there's opportunities for investment as well.
So I guess just to give the listener a little idea of, that project sounds really awesome. And so is that taking place near Michigan State or, geographically, where is that
about 20 minutes
root?
Outside of Michigan State.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's right in the city of Lansing. Oh. Michigan State is East Lansing.
All right. I love that. And I'll share my perspective here. This podcast has afforded me the opportunity to talk with people that manage hundreds of thousands of acres, right? I will say that industrial farming has scale and advantages until that supply chain shuts down. And I will also say that it does not fix food deserts that happen in America. And it does not fix neighborhoods where there is not a grocery store, right?
That's right.
So, that your mission, Hope, gives me literal goosebumps right now, because I think that is a way to look at to look at agriculture and say, yes, we have higher corn yields than ever. And yes, more people across the world are eating proteins. And so there's a bigger market for corn and soybeans to feed the animals that give the protein. We have it down where you can feed a chicken very little and get a huge amount of protein, like all this stuff. But if there's no grocery store nearby that you can go to, then does it matter to you? And I think the answer is no. It just doesn't, right?
As farmers, the core is to feed people, right? And there's, as my grandmother used to say, there's no one way to skin a cat. So, there's so much innovation that is happening in the farming space right now. Whether we talk about it, whether it's the large industrialized farms to the smaller farms, the urban farms, the organic farms, but then there's also hydroponic farms and vertical farms, right?
Oh, sure.
Are they all around how we take, the earth's bounty to be able to take care of people? Yes. And so I think it's this time that we all kind of start expanding our mind and kind of, stretching that box and making that box a little bit bigger to think about how we are going to speak to and address the needs of our communities.
I think that is incredibly well stated. And yesterday, right, I talked to a manager of a very, very large fund that owns farmland, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a great conversation, and he is amazing. And this is a totally different conversation. And I'm just my this little spark's going off in my head of like, you know, the community, it isn't always served by the current models we have in place. And some communities are completely disregarded by those models. And so I love that agriculture can come as a partial solution to some of these problems that are socioeconomic and bigger in nature. And I just love it. I don't know. I hope I would love to invest. Shoot me a prospectus. I like where this is going. Shoot me one. For real. Let's see what we can do. But I do think that like that's just fantastic mission-based focus. And if I ever can in my world put together a panel of my friends from this journey, I would love if there was a seat at the table for y'all right next to our friends in a more industrial space, because I think it's an important conversation we have about small farming, big farming, family farming, organic farming, purpose, values driven farming, right? So
Absolutely.
anyway, I would love to be able to do that, and now my heart is full. But let's hit a couple of things. I did want to talk about real estate with y'all in a slightly different capacity, and so I only could talk a little bit about your love of Detroit, JaQ, because that's been a big theme, and maybe some of the real estate story from your perspective there.
Yes. So yes, my love of Detroit. My family migrated here back in 1950. So we're going on 75 years strong right here in the city of Detroit. My father was a Ford Motor Company man. Spent 30 years building cars. Built the first 1965 Mustang for my Mustang lovers out there. We are celebrating 60 years Mustang here in Detroit. So I'm a bit of a car girl as well as a real estate junkie. In addition to that. So, but Detroit, to your point, I mean, for those of you that have been following the story of Detroit, our beloved city has definitely gone through its ups and downs. Literally, as I sit here in Midtown Detroit today, I recall 10 years ago, the city filed for bankruptcy. And I recalled where, you know, our real estate was literally going for 25 cents on a dollar. And it was just, now you're talking off the heels of 2008, 2009.
Sure.
You talk about, we went from having a cold to having COVID. Okay. It was
right. It's been a rough run.
It was a rough run. And so, you know, I would dare to say, you know, I was an investor in real estate at that time. I had put a lot of money into Midtown with the hopes and prayers that, you know, back then in 2007, when I made my investment, that, you know, that Detroit was going to one day see the promise. And so I have to admit that it's been patient capital, my friend. You know, as I have sat here, you know, from 2007 to now 2024, but to now see this, the whole 180 of what's happening in Detroit, it's just tremendous. I was very fortunate to be part of what they call NEZ. People like to say opportunity zones, but where, you know, we were able to get tax advantages to be part of that rebirth. So albeit it was a little rough at times, the tax incentives were very favorable for folks that were willing to take the leap of faith and move from, you know, the suburbs back into the city, right? Because it was an urban flight out of here, you know, back in the 80s. And now we're seeing just, I mean, there's basically right now to this day, there's 10 applications for every one apartment just to get into Detroit. You know, that's, you know, I would definitely say Detroit is a strong player, and it's becoming a strong international player. So keep your eye on Detroit, my friends. I don't know if you have anything to add. I know Hope does a lot of work as well from a developer standpoint. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
As a native Detroiter, and I don't live there, but every time I come back, I'm so excited to see the new developments take place. And I know one of our biggest that has just gotten a lot of international acclaim is the Gordie Howe Bridge. I think it is just really putting a punctuation on the fact that Detroit is an international city. You know, many of us grew up being able to go back and forth across the bridge
to Canada.
But one of the things that I say that is you go, I mean, one, we're right off the water. But if you go along the shoreline, I'm happy to see where there's some development that is, I would say, east of downtown, but now we're starting to see where there's more opportunities being forged further further across the city or up the city around where that bridge is in the Southwest Lansing. And now the development opportunities are kind of starting to expand even a little bit beyond the borders of the Central Business District. So there's still a lot of opportunities to invest in Detroit. Is it as cheap as back in the day when we knew it, where you can get a house for $1? Well, no, you're probably not going to get a house for $1. But are you going to pay $1 million for your starter home? Absolutely not. Detroit is still very affordable compared to various other MSAs out there.
I love those perspectives, both about the city and the culture. And there was one comment in there I'd like to dive into a little more. When we talk a lot about opportunity zone investments and ag in Delaware State, DSTs, and we do a lot of that, right? But I think it's one thing to deploy capital remotely, to say, I'm selling my small business, I have a very low basis, this opportunity zone investment sounds great, it seems like a good tax play, I'll deploy 10 million into that, and then over time I get that step up. And I understand improvements are happening, but I'm in Champaign, Illinois, and this is really a tax play. Yeah. I mean, and that's what we do. It is an entirely different thing to hear about the outcomes of opportunity zone investing over the last 14 years, right? Like that. I know it hasn't been around that long tax wise, but to hear to hear your take on an opportunity zone and the outcome is so much different, I think, just from the perspective of it as a tax vehicle. And I really appreciated that. And I'd love to get any more thoughts on that too.
Well, so, we have to remember that opportunity zones is an opportunity for developers to invest their money into communities that needed a little TLC, right? So then kind of post that, what real estate is placemaking, right? And so if you have a significant project that comes online, what we've seen happen is that now these communities are able to attract more capital. Many times capital is very scared. And so the opportunity zone as a policy has allowed investors to feel more comfortable to put capital in places that they otherwise would not have. And then once you fast forward and you look at the community, now you're starting to see where development people are starting to attract. And so it started as a seed and then it starts to balloon. And I've seen the story in kind of various communities. And again, I'll tell you, I've seen it in my own community, even the project we're working on. The county is coming through, the state is coming through, you see private investment. So as soon as you see the government money coming in, then that allows investors to also feel more comfortable to say, then I want to put my capital there. And I believe that is really going to take it where we are going to start seeing some reemergence of places like Detroit are able to have a renaissance, and it's going to create opportunities for housing. I know one of the big conversations is that there's like a lack of housing, right? I mean, we are really in a housing crisis, and that housing is becoming so incredibly expensive that now, even as we look at this next generation, people are putting off getting their first homes until sometimes after the age of 40, because they just simply can't afford to purchase that first home that's north of $350,000. So with the opportunity zone, now they're able to help defer that cost, as well increase the housing capacity in communities. And that's what we want, and that's what we need.
I absolutely love those perspectives. And unfortunately, we're up against half an hour, which is about what we're trying to do here. But I have to say, this was really great. And me personally understanding how agriculture has a different face and can help in communities. And with tech today of ag, it actually is probably a lot more productive than it would have been in the past. And I want to thank you both for your time, and I just love this convo, and I hope we can continue it in other forums moving forward. But Hope and JaQ, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Craig, for the
Pleasure,
invitation.
Craig.